portable toilet would refer to use of a specific date for a specific event. At the conclusion of the event, it would be removed. An outhouse is a permanent structure. This appears to be planned to be permanent. The idea of a portable restroom on the premises continually was difficult to imagine. Summers here are very hot, and last year I recall having very few days of what I would call poor man's weather, a phase created for the period of time when you don't need heat and you don't need AC. It occurs in the spring and the fall, and we've experienced some very hot, humid weather for several months in the last few summers. This is a health issue. Let's refresh our memories as to why sewers and septic systems became so important as a health issue. In 1832, 49, and 66, there were serious outbreaks of cholera in Philadelphia, which is a gastronomic intestinal infection resulting from improper dissemination of waste. There's a health reason why we don't support the use of outhouses in our cities and towns anymore. With that being said, I find it selfish to think that a residential neighborhood should need to live with the sight or the odor. It means nothing to me that porta potties have been placed around the borough as temporary for construction, road work, or some commercial interests. For the borough to let this slide in residential neighborhoods, and I'm hearing that there's no specific rules at this time in place, keep in mind this is a health issue as an infectious disease issue when deciding on the option. If it is decided that outhouses are acceptable in the borough, I would request that on the project that it be placed in the garage, thus cutting the view and lessening the odor to neighboring residents, or at least several feet from property lines of either personal property, residential, or businesses. Any issue that has not been another issue that's not been mentioned is vandalism, of tipping one over. For some, it's considered a lark or just a dare. Hot weather and breezy days can cause a lot of odor in the surrounding area. Choose the restrictions carefully, as there could be a permanent outhouse coming near you in the future.
Thank you. Public comment.
Good evening. I'm Sue Sipperly. I live at 314 North Stratton in Gettysburg. And I have not had a chance to review the draft budget yet, but I hope it contains funding for the zoning review that Ms. Marshall mentioned at a previous workshop. One item on the agenda tonight is an example of changes that were made in 2008 to the zoning map whose consequences are just now apparent. There are definitions that are missing, incomplete, or conflicting with the ordinance text. An attempt to follow a land use trend at the time, using build-to lines instead of setbacks, sometimes conflicts with existing neighborhood structure. Bottom line, this needs to be addressed in a coherent way rather than piecemeal, as has been happening. That said, I support the proposed zoning map change to reinstate R1 zoning where tourist commercial was expanded into Colt Park. I support the need for regulating portable restrooms. More public restrooms are needed, though. I have not seen the theft of services draft, but I wonder whether theft of cable service is a matter for local police or if the supplier should pursue that. I believe that was discussed at the last workshop. The event venue, you know my thoughts on that. Thanks for listening.
Thank you. Public comment.
Good evening. Scott English, 6668 West High Street, property owner. As the applicant, I appreciate your reading, taking in consideration, and continuing the ongoing discussion of my objections to and suggested changes to the current draft language contained in the zoning text amendment 22001 event venue. I hope you have had a chance to review my latest suggested ZTA subject language provided via email and hard copy today. As a DTA applicant, I'm requesting that my most recent ZTA language from today be included as alternative language. Please let me know what the planned action dates are for the ZTA and the next time it will be on the council's agenda. Don't forget about our history talks at the Gettysburg Academy this Friday, Saturday, and Sunday during Gettysburg's Christmas Festival weekend. Call 717-334-0224 for more information. Again, I sincerely thank all of you for your time, patience, and understanding working through this process.
Any other public comment? Seeing none? Oh, sorry, please. My apologies.
That's right. My name is Ted Hurt, and I live on Baltimore Street, and I've been trying to follow Mr. English's application, but I don't know all the details, what's going on, but I informed several council members in the past that I think that what he intends to do within limits seems to be appropriate. I don't know, it seems to be caught up in a broader issue, which of course is beyond my comprehension since I'm one property owner. My other question, and maybe this is in a different agenda, is I noticed a whole listing of drafts of various ordinances, and I don't know if that's going to come up later in this session because they're like shaded over or stricken out as maybe they're not on the agenda to discuss tonight. For instance, sidewalk, sign, code enforcement, historic district replacement materials. I don't know what the status of those is, but I'd be interested in reviewing whatever drafts become available.
Thank you. I believe you're referring to section 9 of the agenda, which is tabled old business.
Okay.
Many of those revisions are in process, and we talk about them sporadically. So they're being worked on by staff currently.
So they're not for public consumption yet?
Not at the moment, but they are certainly public material when they're ready to be discussed. All right, any other public comment? Okay. So that takes us to old business, and the first item on the agenda is the employee complaint policy. Council should have in their folder the most recent draft of the complaints policy. President Heiser has worked in the edits recommended by our labor attorney. And I think probably the most expeditious thing here today is just to go over the changes and see if anybody else has any concerns or suggestions. I believe all of the police department's concerns have been met by this draft, so please let me know if something jumps out at you that we need to continue to work with. The first change is in the second paragraph, highlighted in yellow. The borough manager is responsible for maintaining an environment of honor and integrity within the municipal government and building and sustaining trusting relationships between the public, employees, and elected officials. The bottom of that page under process, it is now called process as opposed to policy. Individuals from the public may make complaints in any form, including written, by email, or in person, or by telephone. An employee becoming aware of alleged misconduct shall immediately notify their supervisor. Should the employee's supervisor be unavailable, they shall immediately notify the employee that their supervisor reports to, department head or borough manager, unless their supervisor is the borough manager or chief of police. Should that be the case, the employee shall immediately notify the human resources director. Supervisors shall document the receipt of the complaint, ensuring that the nature of the complaint is defined as clearly as possible. And I'm just kind of staring here, so if anybody wants to butt in, please feel free to just yell out. Complaint investigations within the police department shall be conducted in accordance with the adopted Gettysburg Police Department Personnel Complaints Policy. Complaint investigations within other departments of the borough government shall be conducted by the borough manager, assistant borough manager, and human resources director. In the event that the complaint is lodged against the borough manager, subsequent investigations will be conducted by the assistant borough manager, bureau human resources director, president of council, and vice president of council. In the event that the complaint is lodged against the assistant borough manager, subsequent investigations will be conducted by the borough manager and human resources director. In the event that the complaint is lodged against the human resources director, subsequent investigations will be conducted by the borough manager and assistant borough manager. In the event that the complaint is lodged against the chief of police, subsequent investigations will be conducted by the mayor, borough manager, and human resources director. And then we move on to the oversight section. And the first bullet point, data analysis. Borough council shall be provided, within the limits imposed by the law, access to, collection of, and examination of relevant information on all external complaints or allegations of complaint misconduct, including but not limited to, and then that list is intact. The next outlined bullet point, monitoring. The mayor, borough council president, borough council vice president shall be provided with monthly summaries of all police incidents involving use of force and any external complaints or allegations of employee misconduct received by the borough. Skipping ahead to the next highlighted section, when at all possible, a review of this information shall be done in person with the mayor, council president, and council vice president present. And then we skip down to reporting. Borough council will receive monthly reporting of all new, updated, and unresolved complaints. We strike the word external from the next sentence, and we finish that paragraph. Failure of the borough manager or chief of police to comply with this reporting requirement will result in progressive disciplinary action. In the next paragraph, failure of the borough manager or chief of police to comply with this reporting requirement will result in progressive disciplinary action. And on the very last page, we have a line added by our labor council. An employee accused of criminal conduct will be advised of his, her, or their guarantee rights. So does anything jump out at anybody? Is there anything missing? Does anybody have a question as to why any of these changes were made? Is everybody comfortable with this policy as it's drafted? All right. I just want to reiterate for the sake of the public, the purpose of this policy. It has been requested by our staff that they be notified when a complaint is lodged against them. In the past, they may not have been always notified that a complaint was lodged against them. It is also to provide the checks and balances necessary to ensure that any infraction that an employee of the borough might commit or be alleged to commit is documented in a way that limits the borough's liability and illustrates that we are an attentive employer and that we hold our staff, both uniformed and non-uniformed, to an incredibly high standard of behavior. I think that this does this. It gives us the ability to do something we haven't been historically very good at, that is to document the behavior of our employees and to make sure that behavior is corrected. Is there anything anybody else would like to see added to this? All right. Do we have everything we need to move forward with this policy?
I would think that it would be right for you to make a recommendation for, have it placed on the agenda for the December meeting for adoption of the policy.
All right. Is everybody comfortable with that? Do we have a consensus to do that in December? I'm seeing some nods. Okay. Thank you all. Thanks for helping put that issue to bed with relative ease and cooperation. All right. The next issue on our agenda is for the theft of services ordinance. Ms. Marshall, do you have anything to give us on that?
I actually have a question. So after we discussed this in July, I believe, I spoke with Harry Eastman. He had suggested that the impetus for this ordinance was to create a standard to prevent people from throwing garbage on our public, household garbage on the pedestrian waste baskets. And then while we did that, we added in provisions to prevent people from essentially tapping into other people's utilities, which can be handled privately, but if it's something that we can catch while we're doing a regulated rental inspection and enforce at that time, it would be advantageous to the tenants who often, even though they have rights, might not necessarily feel like they have the power to advocate for themselves or know how. So after talking to Harry, he actually recommended strongly that the use of waste containers, the unlawful use of waste containers, be pulled out into the waste management ordinance and not be in this ordinance. And so then this ordinance stands alone, essentially just as a function to keep people from tapping into other people's utilities, which I don't know that that's, my question is, does council want to pursue a full ordinance just for that purpose, which would be about 4 standards? If not, we can put a pin in it, and then as we update property management code or regulated rental or some other ordinance, if we find an appropriate place for it, we can always kind of pursue it at that time.
No, that's a good question. If we separate out the trash component, it seems like there's not a lot for the ordinance to stand on in terms of purpose. How prolific would you say the issue of theft of services, theft of utility services in our rental housing inventory, how widespread is that?
We have found, since I've been here, since 2019, we've found 3 instances through the regulated rental inspections.
And do we currently have a mechanism for dealing with that when we find it?
No, because it's private. It's essentially a private matter. I mean, we do work with the tenants to connect them to the utility companies to verify with the utility companies that they're the only unit on the utilities, and if they're not, to have the utility companies work with the landlord to separate them off. Because in all cases that we found, it wasn't another tenant tapping into theirs. It was designed essentially through a renovation that wasn't that didn't separate out their utilities. So just
the
ended up being a
mechanism we have
long
now
process for them to.
So what we have now is we have a way to, when we discover this, to notify the utilities, and it becomes their issue to resolve.
We notify the tenant and the utilities, yeah.
Yeah. Well, what's everybody's thought on that? I'm not sure we need to move forward with an ordinance for theft of services if the trash is going to be dealt with in an existing ordinance.
I agree. I agree with you.
How long would it take to, I mean, you said it could be incorporated in like the regulated rental. How long would that take to, I mean, would we be waiting a couple months for that to?
Yeah, definitely. So I know we had met at one point with Wes about making changes to the property maintenance and regulated rental and building codes, and so we can probably, through that process, try to find a place to work that in. And then I could move forward with the amendment for the unlawful use of waste containers in waste management and sort of just move forward with that now instead of the other.
That seems the sensible way to proceed.
So I just have a question. So what we're talking about with the waste management, with the trash, that's only for the public cans?
It was for public, and it was for using other residents' or businesses' cans without their
Okay,
permission.
because I remember that workshop where Chief said you have to have something for him to point to, because it's not just the public cans on the sidewalk, it's a lot of residents using other residents' cans because they do not have their own, which they should.
Yes.
And their landlord should provide that.
Yep.
Do
you have what you need for that?
I do, thank you.
Great. Anybody else have anything to add to that? Okay. Moving on, zoning revisions in regards to the tourist commercial district changes. Ms. Marshall?
So, you have on your draft budget, you have a rezoning. And so my question today is, would you like to handle this through a comprehensive rezoning or move forward before the rezoning?
Well,
It's gonna be the theme of today, of the
is
day.
there a risk that if we don't move forward, we're going to see more of the, Airbnb redevelopment of a residential neighborhood?
Yeah, there would be a potential in the gap between, before the zoning ordinance is adopted for, new Airbnbs to pop up. I just wanted to make sure, because when we talked about this, we had not talked about a comprehensive rezoning, and so I wanted to,
Yeah. I mean, what's a realistic time frame for replacing the ordinance? We're looking at least a year, right?
Yeah.
Probably closer to 2, if not more. And in that time, how many homes could be purchased and
that's true,
turned into Airbnbs in a residential neighborhood?
okay.
Anybody have a strong feeling on this?
I think we should move forward because Airbnbs are a problem. They're popping up everywhere. It's time to
Okay,
crack down,
we can do
I
that.
think.
I think we should be proactive in this. There's too much interest in the community in how this is playing out.
Well, and you two are certainly the ones who are going to hear the complaints loudest if that particular area of Colt Park continues to fall prey to development. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think we should move forward. A lot could happen in a year or two.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank
Great.
you.
That brings us to the zoning text amendment 22001, event venue. So I don't think we had anything in the folder that was new specifically, right? No. So the last time we discussed this, we arrived at a pretty large impasse, as at the last minute, uses we had not been asked to consider previously were being included, and the amendment draft as written did not seem to provide for those uses. So we all sort of had to kind of go, well, back to the drawing board here, because it seems like we're being asked to start from scratch. So we have to make a decision as to what we want to do moving forward on this amendment. I would think we have 3 choices ahead of us to make. One is, do we just plow forward as the draft is written, as we've worked on it for several months, take a vote on it, and let the chips fall where they may? Honestly, I'm not sure what happens in that case. From private conversation, I'm not sure where the votes are on this right now. The next choice would be that we start from scratch. We rewrite the thing based on the initial application, and we try to make it work again. Or the third choice is that, assuming we adopt this 2023 draft budget, where we will be replacing the zoning ordinance, do we table this amendment request pending a new zoning ordinance? And hopefully craft something that allows for more what's the word, Carly? Not zoned, form-based? Is that the term? More form-based zoning? So those are the 3 choices in front of us. So I'm really anxious to hear everybody's thoughts.
For somebody to go for.
I would love that. I would love that.
Well, several of you know that I think this is taking way too long to begin with. People own a property and we're restricting what they can do with it right now. And to wait for the zoning redo is just gonna make it drag out even further. I mean, we're taking money out of their pocket, so to speak. I don't think that's right. I think this should have been voted on months ago. So,
So what
and
would you
it
do?
doesn't, well, the language doesn't seem to be right. Every time we talk about this, things change. Don't know why, but they do. Somebody finds something now to bring up, somebody changes this, now all of a sudden we're only going to allow 2 events outside. I think the text amendments as written are a little bit confused and over-restricted. Just my opinion.
So what would you do moving forward here?
I think we need to do something to help the property owner. I sat in a meeting not too long ago and that's what I heard. Well, we did this to help the property owner. So we're helping one property owner and we're screwing another one. Something seems wrong there.
Yeah.
Which one are you what are you referring to? Helping one property owner and not the other? I'm not,
Well, we had a lot that was purchased, they're building a house on it, and we changed from an intersection to a curve so that they could get a driveway, because we wanted to make
Oh,
it go
okay.
through, and we wanted to make it smooth and help them out.
you're talking about the one next to
Yeah,
your,
I
okay,
am.
all right.
So we changed a lot of things to make that possible for that property owner, and we've done nothing but throw up roadblocks for the English property. Whether you like that scenario or not, that's the bottom line. I just don't think it's right.
It's worth noting, though, that the successive revisions to this amendment request have not come from council. Like, we are presented with revision after revision after revision with new changes, but that's not coming from us. Like,
Well, but we've changed the revisions that were given to us too.
Sure.
So, I mean, we can sit here and change revision after revision after revision. I think it's time to vote.
As is?
Huh?
Voted it as is?
Well, I think it's time to vote to let them do it or not. I mean, I've always been in favor of this. I've never backed away from that from day one. I understand the neighbors' complaints. Believe me, I understand the neighbors' complaints. But at the same time, you know, I mean, technically, if they sell the lot, they can put a 3-story apartment house on that property, right off the sidewalk and go almost the whole way back. And rent to Adams County Housing Authority, or anybody else for that matter. Don't know that that's gonna be a better solution than an events center that's gonna have events every now and then and on the weekend. Depending on the tenants that come in there, your life can be a living hell every day. I know because I own a property next to college students. I can explain all that. You wanna talk about trash? Comes over in the yard all the time. So, you know, is a 3-story apartment building on this lot worse than an event center? Maybe, maybe not. All depends on the tenants they get. But the point is, if they move ahead with the lot and they put a 3-story apartment building in there, this becomes a moot point. So I think it all goes back to where it started, whether or not, I mean, we don't have a definition in the zoning ordinance that covers this. So that's what got us here to begin with. It wasn't listed as a right, wasn't listed as a special exception, nobody wanted to make up their mind. And so we beat this horse that it's hamburger. And we still don't have any meat to eat.
I agree with John that this is really disturbing how long it's being dragged out. But I have a question for Carly and Charles. In the talks about redoing our whole zoning area here, that was not one circumstance driven, correct? It was that you all felt that our entire zoning plan, policy, ordinance needed to be renovated, looked at. Am I correct? It wasn't, well, it was started because of this particular request, but it wasn't limited to just correcting that.
No, so actually when we proposed the comprehensive rezoning, it was not in relation to this request, and this request wasn't what spurred it. It's a very difficult ordinance to work with. There's a lot that's been sort of amended over the years that doesn't flow well. It's it's outdated. You know, I mean, obviously, we have newer uses that aren't accounted for. And so it's overdue.
When was the last time it was rezoned? Any of them?
There's been amendments over the years, but the last comprehensive rezoning was 2008.
Zoning as it is very complex when you start talking our overlay districts. And so this would really streamline the rights permitted in an overlay district and put that essentially into base zoning.
Okay, what would that plan do to our current issue that has prompted this?
Well, so if this was adopted before the new zoning ordinance, then we would just carry the language into the draft ordinance. Like all of the new amendments that have come through, that language would be carried into the draft, and then it would go, same process, meetings, public hearings. If not, then we would have these discussions again when we were talking about the larger zoning ordinance.
The position you were thinking of hiring for looking at this, was for how long? Interminably, or until the task is complete, or?
I think they gave us a number of meetings, but I don't remember how many.
Yeah, I don't remember the number of meetings. It would take about a year. I mean, Michael Baker would come in, they would have community meetings called charrettes, and everything would be peeled back. The onion would be peeled back at all its layers, and each segment of the community would be looked at. And what I mean segment of the community or zoning districts now would be looked at meticulously. What makes sense hypothetically would stay, and what doesn't would go or altered in some way. But that will take time. Michael Baker will be engaged for the better part of a year, if not a little longer. And then after all that comes the drafting of the new zoning ordinance, which then council would review and have to adopt.
In all cases pending now would be placed on hold until that was complete? Or would we go forward on cases pending now and then set about fixing things?
When you say cases, do you mean ordinance amendments or actual applications?
I mean application.
So we would not restrict applications until the new ordinance was advertised. At that point, there's pending legislation, and so if the application may not be in conflict with that pending ordinance, then it would be essentially the applications would be put on hold until it's adopted. Between the point of the advertisement of the hearing and the adoption. So not through the whole process, just after we advertise the hearing.
That great philosopher Gilda Radner said, "Ain't nothing easy."
Mrs. Butterfield, do you have a preference at this point? Do we vote it? Do we start over? Do we
I'd
table
like
it?
to hear what others have said, having just heard what
Okay.
the staff said.
Mr. Carr?
I agree with Mr. Lawver. I think this has gone on and on and on and on and on. I applaud the staff and the property owner and the public members that have come to speak on this issue every time it's been on the agenda. I appreciate the staff's work and the council's work, of course, because it's gone on, draft after draft. But I just don't, I think somewhere we got thrown a curveball by perhaps some public comment that we didn't think of, perhaps, and it kind of has changed things. But I'm also going to go back to thinking about the, outdoor events versus tented events. Tented event is one thing. Outdoor event or party, I mean, neighbors have parties all the time on their own property. If you have a big yard and you want to throw a big party, you can throw a big party. We've got noise ordinance for a reason. If it's a complaint, call the police. I just feel like we're really beating something. We're restricting somebody's property and someone's business too much. And I just think maybe, I agree with Mr. English on this currently, the draft as it's written. It does restrict the use to 2 events per month. Now, I remember whenever I said, fine, let's go with 2 events. I was thinking 2 large tented events outside. I do not think we should, I think it's unreasonable to limit somebody's business to 2 events per month. They want to have indoor things, let them have it all time. They could be a restaurant. They could be restaurant open 7 days a week with a band outside if they wanted, as long as they're paying attention to the noise ordinance. But I think we need to maybe go back to the drawing board. I hate that, but I'm not ready to vote on it as is.
I'm willing to plow ahead.
Vote it.
Based on what we have. I do think we talked a lot about this, many meetings, public input. Eventually, we're going to have to vote on it, so I'd be for doing that as soon as we can.
Yeah, I mean, I have been supporting this project since the very beginning. And like some of my colleagues, it feels like it's been drawn out for so long. But then when I see something like this tonight, it doesn't feel good. It feels almost like a retaliatory kind of thing, I'm not sure. And I think about our, wanting to get it right and bringing in a Michael Baker that would actually look at, but that, we're looking at possibly 2 more years. And I don't think that's fair for property owners. And so I think at some point we need to call the question, can we do both of these? Can we make a decision on this? And can we go ahead and try to take kind of the outdated, zoning and bring that up to date? Can we do both? That's the question. I don't know that I have the answer.
So, so which camp would you fall in then?
Like right, yeah.
Middle of 3 things? Okay,
Yeah.
that's great. All right.
It doesn't feel, neither one really feels good about it. Doesn't
Right.
feel great about, one hand, I think we should call the question and take the vote. On the other hand, is that the right decision for this council at this time? I wish I had more of a clear.
Yeah, I get what everybody's saying about us getting a little too far off into the weeds on this over time, 100%. But it's an interesting application for a number of reasons, and it has sort of laid bare a number of questions. For example, the use of public, portable toilets. That's now a separate issue we have to address. If we were just to take this as the initial application and vote on it today, we'd be voting in favor of allowing the use of portable toilets indefinitely, which is contrary to this other thing we're trying to do.
Right.
The problem, I think, with the zoning ordinance is that it can have these unintended ripple effects that we don't feel for some time. So we can accidentally create a situation which 2 years down the road becomes a problem. So I think we did the right thing in picking this thing apart, right? I mean, we had a responsibility to look at the setbacks. We had a responsibility to look at the parking. We had a responsibility to look at the public toilets. So I don't think we, started out this process from a poor place. We did what we were supposed to do here. But it's an interesting application for so many reasons, right? I mean, really, it probably should have been a zoning variance, not a text amendment. Because we're trying to craft an amendment that applies to an unknown number of parcels, but it's really about one parcel.
Right, we're trying to shoehorn it, is what it feels like.
And, and in every meeting we've talked about this, we go back and forth. This isn't about one property, but it needs to apply to this one property correctly. That's a really tenuous position for us to be in. So did we get off into the weeds? Yes. I'm not convinced it was avoidable, though. There's a lot of weeds here. And at the core of it, we still have this question of whether it's appropriate to have events in a residential neighborhood. So I think we have a responsibility to try to think about what those ripple effects would be. So I don't think we did anything wrong here. I do apologize that this has taken forever, and I do appreciate your patience on this, Mr. English, and I know sometimes that's been a challenge. And I feel it, we're all feeling it, we feel it for you, and I do apologize for that. So, I mean, but just today, we got suggested amendments to it as well, right? So we can't even vote on it in 2 weeks if we wanted to, without considering the requested amendment, or the requested revisions that were submitted today. We haven't had a chance to debate those yet. So we can push a vote in 2 weeks based on the last draft we debated in council, but it's still not even what's being requested as of today. The request keeps changing too. So now, Mrs. Butterfield, where do you fall?
Thank goodness for Ms. Lawson. I'm not the only person like this. I just see why we should move on this darn thing and get it complete, and I see why, like you say, things came up tonight.
And wanting to get it right,
No, it seems every time there's public comment, either way, something new surfaces.
Right.
And I fault myself for not having thought of all those things ages ago. But I just need to mow a bit longer. One mow.
Just a reminder of where we are procedurally. And I think in order to move this forward, if council chooses to move this forward, I do understand, absolutely, there's a tension, because this is coming, an application from a specific property owner. But there's no doubt what you're doing here, you're legislating, and you're legislating so that this use can be established properly within the context of the entire borough. I believe that at least, or as of right now, is it like 6 zoning districts, maybe more, that it would be
5 or 6.
5 or 6 that it would be allowed in. But in terms of moving it forward, what we, as silly as this is going to sound, because we have had a lot of public comment and so forth, council is going to have to, if you're going to move it forward, settle on an ordinance, and you aren't going to just be voting on that ordinance. You then need to have that, you need to have an official public hearing on that ordinance before you can take final action.
Yep.
So, but I don't think we can move forward with a public hearing until council figures out what it wants to do. And we did receive some suggested revisions today, which I think are worthy of consideration. And so, kind of still, I know it's taken a lot of time, but we still have to go through the public hearing process. And that public hearing process, of course, will also require a notification to the county planning so that council will also, in addition to having the benefit of public comment on the, whatever you arrive at, you'll also get recommendations from the county on that. But you gotta get to an ordinance before we can move it forward to that process.
Yeah. Yeah, that is right.
So if we vote on the text amendment in December and it gets voted down, we're back to square one.
Well, you can't even officially vote to enact the text amendment until you have come up with essentially an ordinance, and then what your vote would be is to move it forward to a public hearing, which is the next step in the enactment process. Because you cannot vote on a text amendment until you've conducted at least one public hearing on the actual ordinance provisions that you're moving forward legislatively. But I guess in theory, council has to decide what they're gonna move forward with too, so.
Right, right.
So,
So at the very least, we would have to review and debate the suggested amendments that were submitted today. We would have to review the entire thing as written and make sure that these incorporate in a way that works. And then, so we're looking at probably the January workshop at this point.
I think that sounds to me like probably about the earliest.
Right, because we don't have a December workshop.
Right.
So is there a consensus to continue discussing this in January, to try to incorporate or at least review the requests made today and come up with a final version of this in order to attempt to move the process forward, or do people want to table this?
I don't really want to table it.
Yeah, we should move forward.
Okay, so we will review the entire draft with the new revisions again in January. Is that everybody's consensus?
And I do have one question. So Charles, will this discussion have to affect the budget if the budget includes this person to look at the zoning? Do you see what I'm asking?
No, I don't think it would affect the proposed 2023 budget, no.
Okay.
Any ordinance that you choose to enact, and it's not foreseeable how many you may do next year, I mean, there are costs associated with those, but from a predictive point of view, it's, I don't want to say negligible on the budget, but it would be absorbed under the course of normal business that you've budgeted for.
Okay, any other comments on this issue?
I know that we have a large agenda today. Do we want to talk, we don't want to go over any of the items? Some of those revisions were sent on November 17th, some on the 20th, those suggested revisions, or is this?
Did you have a chance
everybody
to review
needs-
what was sent today? Because I did not.
I did, but barely.
Right.
I was looking mainly at the 1117 and 1120 emails, but, I mean, yeah, I don't want to see it tabled, and we certainly have to discuss it more. I just know if we don't start picking at it to get it down to where we need it to be.
Well, so what has to happen, I think, is
Always gonna be on the agenda.
we have to take the submissions from this month,
Right.
and they need to be incorporated into the existing document in a markup so we can see the suggested changes as opposed to what's already been proposed.
And I understand that we can't vote on anything today being a workshop, but we do need to give some direction to staff
Right.
to create something for us to discuss next, or no?
I think you have your discussion points on
Mhm.
the revisions that were submitted to you by the applicant.
Okay.
I'm sorry, say that again?
I think the discussion points would be the revisions that were submitted by the applicant.
No,
Right.
we definitely have the discussion points,
Okay.
but we won't have another draft until we give you some direction.
Correct.
That's my point.
Yes.
So we're gonna discuss it again in January.
Okay.
Okay. All right, anybody else? All right. Let us move on to portable restrooms. Ms. Marshall?
This is quick. So, we have, as we just talked about, we're looking to potentially move forward with the new zoning next year. We need to adopt the new saldo before we adopt new zoning, and we need to adopt the sidewalk ordinance before we adopt the saldo. So I would like to table some of the ordinance revisions that we have that are not very far along, such as the portable restrooms, at least until after the sidewalk ordinance is en route to adoption, so that we can focus on our high priority, larger projects that we have going on, like sidewalk, saldo, signs. And then, I mean, obviously we have some of the smaller ones too, the TC district changes, the theft of services for waste management, which is essentially a couple of standards and an existing ordinance. Like, there's some smaller ones that I think everybody's pretty much in agreement on if we can move forward, but the portable restrooms, the last discussion, there wasn't a lot of, we were very far from anything resembling what would be a draft, and so I would like to table it for now until we get farther along on some of our other open items.
So we currently on the books have nothing about portable restrooms.
No, we don't have anything. Which, if council feels like this is a high priority, then by all means, we can move forward with it. We do have quite a backlog at this point, and so it would be helpful to kind of stem the flow a little bit to get some of the older things done.
Sure, sure. So besides the portable restrooms, what else would you want to put on the back burner?
So, I mean, I think I would rather, in terms of priorities, the sidewalk ordinance would be first priority, and then the saldo, probably in conjunction with the sign ordinance, because I know that that's been hanging out for a long time, and you've pretty much, I think, decided on, had gone through most of the decision points on that. So that's, you know, largely done and just needs to be put in draft form and moved forward. But in terms of sort of really it's the portable restrooms. I think is the lowest priority of what we have open. Unless you disagree.
Well, it's certainly one that's been a subject of conversation in the short term, but it doesn't have a lot of long-term solutions, particularly for businesses that are employing them right now. And I'm positive Mrs. Butterfield would agree that they are going to need a very long time to come to terms with any changes we might make. So I could see why that would be feasible to push that back for now. Anybody else have a strong feeling?
Do some businesses are locked into contracts. You know, if we end the porta potty, it could cause some difficulty in breaking a contract and some financial penalties. So that's just another thing to consider when we're looking at this. The same thing happened with the trash hauling contracts early on in 2007. Were we going to require the businesses to break their contracts with their company and go with the borough hauler? Or were we going to allow the businesses to keep their contract? And in some cases, like the county courthouse, the penalty was upward to $10,000 if they broke the contract. So the same thing comes in here. The businesses that have relied on it for a long time, have signed for their long-term, but we just need to keep that all in the back of our minds too. And my comments on trash and porta potties, Lynn, for some interesting nicknames people have given me. And,
Could you list those, please?
Queen of Trash, Queen of...
Okay, anybody else? Do you accept Ms. Marshall's proposal so that we can concentrate on the bigger deal? Okay. Okey-doke. That takes us to new business, and I believe we have Mr. Malawicki here with us this evening. Hey, buddy. To join Chad and Mr. Gable to talk about grant applications for the Stormwater Authority.
Well, I'll start off by saying,
Would you mind using the podium for us, please? Thank you.
I'll start off by saying I apologize for bringing up another thorny issue. You just went through zoning, and now you're going to hear about stormwater and the Tiber/Stevens Run. As some of you know who sit on the Stormwater Authority, we are trying to apply for grants, and Chad's going to go over that in a second. I'm going to turn to him in a second. But the bottom line in this is that for us to tackle the renovation, replacement, and repair of the Tiber system or the Stevens system, it's going to take a lot of money. And on top of that, the Stormwater Authority doesn't own anything. The borough owns the improvements, I think, in the Stevens-Tiber run. So I'm here today to sort of lay out a little bit of what we're thinking. We are far from a final decision, but there are a number of grants that have come to our attention in the last like 3 or 4 weeks. And what we're trying to do is hustle around and apply for these grants. But the bottom line is they all match, they all involve matches, and we cannot borrow money. The borough would be the entity that would be the guarantor of anything that we did as far as borrowing was concerned. So that being said, Chad, if you would be so kind to start a little conversation about where we are
Sure.
with
And
grants.
I think that the important thing that Mike said there is why it's your agenda tonight, not a Stormwater Authority agenda, is because these are borough-owned facilities. There is another component to that is whenever we apply for grant applications, who applies for them? Is it the authority or is it the borough? So that's still up for the discussion. I understand that it could be either, but the borough is in a better position financially if there is a requirement for a match. So the Stormwater Authority, since they're in its infancy, just doesn't have that backlog of cash to be able to match. So there is some reasons why we're having this conversation here with you all and just not at the Stormwater Authority. And by the way, we are having a Stormwater Authority meeting next Monday night to follow up with this discussion with the other Stormwater Authority members so that we can be prepared. And the other thing I wanted to note before we dive into the weeds here is that there is 2 items on your agenda today that we're going to be killing with 2 birds with 1 stone here. It's item VF, the Gettysburg Interloop Phase B grant funding strategy. We're going to work that into this conversation now as well, so we can skip that later in the agenda. But starting with the the Tiber wall, so like Mike said, the most important part of, there's two grant applications that we're looking at. They're H2O funds that come through DCED. They both use the ARPA acronym. We're all familiar with the American Rescue Plan Act. The money, the post-COVID money, that's what's funding these big pots of money. There's an under $500,000 grant and there's an over $500,000. It's $500,000 to $20 million. So there's two different grant applications that we're looking to submit. Our original strategy was, because our Tiber walls, there's over $4 million worth of Tiber walls that need to be repaired. So that fit the large H2O grant application, and then we were going to use a small H2O grant application for the Gettysburg Interloop Phase B project. And as we started going down to the process of pulling in a consultant to get that application prepared for us, we started realizing that we don't necessarily have easements or ownership over all of these walls. There's some of them that we do in Bream Alley, where it's right along the alley. There's a couple of other places where we have clear ownership of the walls. But most of them, that's less than $500,000 worth of the walls. Most of the $4 million worth of walls, we don't have easements for. And that is a prerequisite for these grant applications. So that basically throws out the large H2O to be used for the walls. So what our new strategy is potentially to switch those two. Use the large H2O funds for the Gettysburg Interloop Phase B project. Use the small H2O funds for the wall project. Now let me tell you, for the Gettysburg Interloop Phase B project, it's a little over a $3 million project. I'm trying to use some large numbers here because it's an overwhelming amount of grants that Charles and we have, I think, about 24 grants that we're trying to manage right now, and some match others and others match, and it's just overwhelming. So I'm trying to use real high level numbers for you right now, but the Gettysburg Interloop project is about a $3 million project. A little over $1 million of that is water resources related. So it's eligible for this H2O funds. Water resources can be stormwater conveyance, stormwater management, and also can be water, drinking water, and sanitary sewer water. Gettysburg Municipal Authority is also looking at some projects with H2O funds. So, and our Gettysburg Interloop project includes a water line replacement. Anytime, as you know, when you do projects in the borough, whenever you're doing, even moving a curb and doing a sidewalks, it affects the underground utilities. And if it affects one underground utility, it affects another one. So we end up having to do a couple of stormwater resource facilities, over $1 million worth of stormwater resource facilities with the Gettysburg Interloop project. In your packets, I believe Charles sent out last week, was a spreadsheet that kind of tried to help understand this funding strategy, this Gettysburg Interloop project, where we have, like I said, a $3.1 million project. We have secured funds, a little over a dozen different grants for $590,000, but that leaves $2.2 million left that's unfunded. We have a couple of grant applications in the works. Just this week, Carly and I worked on the Adams County it's called the ARF, ARRF, the Adams Rescue Recovery Fund. That is also their ARPA money. We did apply for them to try to get some additional funds for the Gettysburg Interloop in the amount of $500,000. That doesn't change the borough's commitment. The borough's commitment to this has always been $80,000. So far, the Stormwater Authority's commitment to this is $70,000. That's the way it stands currently, and not necessarily coming to you guys today to change that. But I wanted to try to get an indication if you're good with us using the small H2O grants for the wall project and the large H2O grant project for the Gettysburg Interloop. Again, knowing that the Gettysburg Interloop Phase B project has a little bit over $1 million worth of stormwater, or worth of water resource related components to it. Now the one other catch, and I'm not ready to give you all the specific numbers to this, but the H2O grant does require a 50% match. We're trying to get an answer on, is the H2O grant a state or federal, because that matters. You can match state with federal, and you can match federal with, and you can match local, so county, with state or federal, but you can't match state and state or federal and federal. You can't match those two grants together. So the grants that we have already are through DCNR, which is local, and our CDBG, which is federal. So we'd have to see how those two match up if we get the H2O funds, to see if we would be able to use those other grants as matches to them. If we can't, then whatever that number ends up being, if it was, instead of we have over $1 million worth of water resources, so somewhere between $1 million and 1.5, we would have to be able to come up with 50% of that as the match, and that would mean we would either have to come up with it through other grant sources, or we would have to basically write a letter that says that we are guaranteeing that we'll pay the 50% if we can't get another grant. We're going to keep applying for other grants in the meantime, but if we can't find them, that we would have to come up with that other 50%.
Okay.
So did I confuse everybody yet?
Totally. So let me ask a few questions if I can. So for the small H2O, we're talking about using that. So that's a project under $500,000. So would we be required to match half of that?
That's right.
Yes.
Okay. And if I'm remembering the last stormwater meeting correctly, the Bream Alley wall is looking about, is it about 400,000 total?
I think the Bream Alley was only like 200, half of the 500,000, 240, 250.
Right.
There's another alley, wall alley, that there are some walls that are in the borough's right of way that we could do some works for the other 250,000.
Okay. And would the Bream Alley project have matching funds from GMA? Is that correct?
Potentially. I don't know the answer to that, Matt. Maybe.
I thought I remembered that from your last stormwater meeting, that there was discussion about splitting that project with GMA.
Well, GMA may have another view of that. I think part of that is theirs, because they're going to disturb the wall. The question is, how do we want the wall reinstalled? Do we want it to be just patched, or this is an opportunity
Right.
to update and renew that entire wall to Springs Avenue? So that's part of what Chad's saying, that 240,000 really is to do the whole thing, and GMA will pay part of that, I'm sure, to the extent that we can negotiate it. But they're not going to pay the lion's share, although we would love for them to do that. I think reality is that's not going to happen.
Okay.
It's just not going to happen.
And the reason I'm hesitant, Matt, about, I don't know the answer, is after the Stormwater Authority meeting, I was instructed to go back to GMA and say that we would rather them replace the wall, so they headed down a different path. At this point, they're not planning on replacing it. They might even bore the pipe, and see if that's cheaper to do a boring under the wall rather than having to get into replacing the wall. So I'm not sure if they're going to be willing to pay for half of it or not. I just don't know that.
I see. So does their interceptor run parallel to the alley, or does it run
Parallel, yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
And it depends on how much disturbance that they actually do. So
Right.
we're not sure about that.
So the wall alley section is where?
That alley does a loop, it does a horseshoe, and it runs a couple places there along that alley.
But what is the section you'd be looking to replace?
Well, we just did the piece out along Water Street, right, with the brand new vertiblocks. So we would be
Right.
looking at the other piece back in the back of that alley that runs east and west.
Along the same side, towards North Washington Street, correct? Chad? Up towards North Washington?
No, in the back of the alley. So after you come off and it does the bottom half of that loop, you'd be looking at that bottom half of that.
Oh, okay, okay.
Wait, I'm
Matt,
sorry, which alley
Matt,
is this?
Matt, let me, I'm sorry. It's Coon Alley. It's Coon Alley.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it doesn't look like Wall Alley. It's anywhere near the
That's
title.
why you were looking at me like,
Yeah.
turning your head like, it's not making sense. Yeah, that's Coon.
Okay, so it's the section is it the section from where we already replaced to Carlisle, or is it Washington to?
Over to Washington, all the way from, yeah.
Yeah,
and
it's
really
up to North Washington.
Yeah, the creek all the way to North Washington Street is within a parcel that's called Aqua. So we're trying to find some definition on what that means. We have the Stormwater Authority's solicitor looking into that, but we think we have the ownership of that wall. It's all the way from the stream, starting at Washington Street, all the way behind Coon Alley.
Okay. So, for those two smaller projects, we could be on the hook for $250,000. And then you have also the larger project with the inner loop where you're asking for 1.43 million, and we would be required to guarantee 715,000 or whatever.
Yeah, and that number, so the amount that we would be looking at for the Gettysburg inner loop, like I said, it's over $1 million for the storm replacement and the water replacement as part of the Gettysburg inner loop. There's also the Chambersburg Street pipe that we had talked about.
Right.
That's associated with that project. It's one of the most important reasons why we want to get that project done, because we know that the Chambersburg Street pipe that we finally found after looking for it for decades upon decades, and we know that Chambersburg Street is literally falling in, and we just keep putting cold patch and packing it in. We know it's only a matter of time till that system just stops working altogether. An old masonry arch chamber from the 1800s. This pipe that we're going to build as part of the Gettysburg inner loop is going to lead us to this Chambersburg Street pipe and allow us to be able to properly fix that. If we would just go ahead and add that to it, we think that that's about $250,000 that we. So we would either be looking at about $1.25 million for just the Gettysburg inner loop project, or about 1.5 for the Gettysburg inner loop and Chambersburg Street pipes together. Again, this large ARPA can go up to $20 million, so both fit within that, well within the amount that you could apply for. So that would be one suggestion, if you would be willing to give a suggestion tonight. Again, I'll be asking the same question to the Stormwater Authority in 1 week from tonight, but it's whether or not, since we're going to go for the large H2O fund, do we also want to include a Chambersburg Street pipe at $250,000, or do we just want to just focus on the Gettysburg inner loop for now and get that taken care of at 1.25? That fits within that $3.1 million total project.
So some of the takeaways, really, as we think about this, is that from the stormwater's perspective, the authority's perspective, we could be asking for a guarantee of about, I'm saying, roughly $2 million. Okay, somewhere 1.5 to $2 million. That's about the maximum debt service that we could afford. Of course, we don't want to borrow that much. So that, just to give you an order of magnitude. Chad, would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think the total amount of grant applications we'd be looking for is about 1.5 to 2 million. So half of that is what
Right.
we'd have to come up with.
Right. So that's $1 million.
That's $1 million.
You know, somewhere between, I've done this enough, it's somewhere between $1 million to $2 million, okay? But we're only going to borrow what we need. We're not going to borrow anything more than that. The other thing, it's sort of an overarching takeaway for everybody, is that we've begun to research ownership, easement, right-of-way, and it reminds me of zoning, Carly. It's going to really be sticky. We're trying to go back and find out what responsibility, if any, the borough has taken, the previous borough councils have taken. We know work has been done in the Stevens-Tiber run by the borough over the years, and we need to just understand from a legal perspective what the options are. So I just want to let everybody know that, because it's going to take legal dollars from our budget and possibly from yours ultimately, because the borough is the owner of these walls. We think. Some of them, at least. and maybe some by default.
Well, as long as they're standing, they may not be our property, but the second they fall, I'm pretty sure they're ours.
Sounds always work.
Yep,
All right,
and
so-
I think that's right.
I think what I'm hearing here, and please correct me, guys, if I'm wrong, is we're talking about they're asking for permission to seek these grant dollars, and we would be committing to being the guarantor for a matching grant. So they're asking us to guarantee $1 million. The goal would be to get it from other funding sources, but if we get these grants and those other funding sources fall through, the borough is then on the hook for about $1 million, and the way we would have to pay for that is through taking out a bond, so we're talking about debt servicing.
Right.
So, thoughts, please?
And can I just add one thing? Notice what we're talking about are all areas that we believe the borough owns or is adjacent to. Borough property, being alleys mostly.
And I wanted to say two quick thoughts. One is schedule-wise. So the grant application's due December 21st.
Yeah.
That's why we need to have this discussion tonight. Ultimately, you'd be authorizing us to go ahead and submit that application at your next council meeting. But we would only have about a week after that next council meeting to actually get it in. So there isn't enough time for us to, we kind of need to give an indication tonight. If you want us to go ahead with that, we'll get our grant writer to get started on it in the meantime, and then we'll ratify that decision at the next council meeting. We have until, it's a 6-year grant window that started in 2020. Whenever the American Rescue Act was discussed, so we get to 2026 to spend the funds. So if you are committed to ultimately to coming up with this money, this isn't necessarily this budget. It's not going to change this year's budget. This isn't going to be until at very best 24, but we could probably end up doing this project in 25. So we have a couple of years to properly budget for the balance if the borough ends up being on the hook for any of it.
Yeah.
Mr. Vice President, what I think everyone needs to understand very clearly is if the council moves in this direction, the ultimate funding source for repaying this debt would actually come through the stormwater fees.
Right.
Which is a separate funding mechanism than tax dollars. So we're going to have later on in the meeting tonight, we're going to talk about the bid and as it relates to a loan that was taken for the Steinware Phase B. The bid has been paying portion of that loan back to the borough since that was done in 2013, I think it was. Similar scenario here where the council would have an agreement with the Stormwater Authority to repay that debt service.
Just one thought I'd like people to kind of kick around as you think about this here is that should something cataclysmic happen, as it already did on Coon Alley there when that wall collapsed, you know, there are places where this wall is a time bomb, you know. So let's say we have a big storm, another hurricane comes through, and the Tiber is pushed beyond its limits, and big sections of that wall come down, and we don't have grant money in place. It's going to cost just as much, but we're paying for all of it. So something to think about.
And the same with Chambersburg Street, too. I mean, what it sounds like you're saying, our engineers talking about, you know, possible collapse of Chambersburg Street for a very, very old, you know, system involving archways and old pipes. I think, yeah, and we have the possibility, we've got money here. Who wants to leave that money on the table when, so
Right.
I'm very much for this.
So this is our effort to try to get out ahead of all of this.
Absolutely.
And,
Right,
you
we
know,
either pay
deal with
now-
what we can
Right.
of what we know
Right.
is ours, when I say ours, the boroughs.
We're either gonna pay now, or we're gonna pay later.
We're gonna,
And
yeah.
if we pay now, we can get other funding. I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer.
Yeah.
So.
Well, and the Chambersburg Street pipe, that's kind of a no-brainer too. That's gotta be,
Absolutely.
now's the time to put that in.
Yep,
That's been a ticking time bomb for 20 years.
right. And it took a long time to find where that was running through, and they've got it. Yeah, I think we have to
Yeah,
move on
something
it.
left loose somewhere that left us find where it comes out, because we've been searching for that for
Decades.
a long time.
Right.
Between the water authority and the highway departments, We put a lot of dye down through there that never appeared anywhere. Makes you wonder where it went.
That's right.
So, and I think it's important, in the same flavor of the discussion we're having, you know, we put together a list of projects in queue, and it's just daunting, and I don't wanna get too sidetracked tonight, but, you know, we have the SCAP pipe, there's a pipe underneath the SCAP that's failing. We go out there and we bandage it together on an annual basis. We would love to be able to pave, the borough has on their paving plan, and our paving plan, John's and Highland. Well, there's a lot of failing pipes, and when we go to pave that street, all those pipes are gonna fail. We have the Long Lane project that is a 200,000, like, there's a ton of other projects that we're just not getting to. So if we got some grant money, it would help us catch up a little bit. I think that's part of the strategy. And we wanna make sure that, you know, staff wants to make sure that we're putting our best foot, it is really daunting, how about it, Charles? Trying to chase all of these things, but we wanna make sure that we're putting our best foot forward, for you all, that we know, you hear about it all the time, that there's all this money out there now, the post-COVID money. We wanna make sure that we're raising our hand
Tapping into it.
for a
Yep.
chance for that money as well.
Right.
Yep, and I applaud you for doing that, really.
Any other thoughts?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mike.
John, what time Monday? What time Monday are you meeting?
I believe Sarah's gonna be advertising.
5:30, our normal time.
5:30.
5:30, yeah.
Thank you, Mike, we appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
All right. So I think what I'm hearing from everybody is let's move ahead with those applications?
Yes.
Okay. Great. Thank you. Okay. Parking holidays, Miss Fissel.
I believe we've discussed this, and this is, if Harry can correct me, just to update the ordinance. And we added Juneteenth as a holiday, so we need to update the ordinance. I believe there were a few other corrections that were just corrections.
Right, with the borough moving towards Sunday parking, we didn't have Easter Sunday as a holiday, so to add Easter Sunday. I think, but we removed Good Friday, is that correct?
Correct.
That was kind of the, or in the proposed draft ordinance. And I think everything else is basically a confirmation of holidays that we had previously. Is that,
Yeah, I think the wording just changed.
we had some, you know, we might have had an antiquated version of holiday or something.
Yes.
So it's to update, I mean, essentially to update the holidays within the context of the parking ordinance where, I mean, basically, our parking ordinance provides for on-street paid parking and off-street paid parking, and the days where that is accepted or exempted from that. So it's a pretty straightforward. There are 3 sections.
So would we be adding Juneteenth or Juneteenth observed?
Well, in the draft that we have, it would be Juneteenth National Independence Day, which is what the federal holiday is.
So is that the observed date, or is that June 19th?
I believe that would be the observed date.
So it could be different every year.
It could be different every year, right?
And
I was
people
under
might
the
assume it's
assumption
the 19th.
it was
even
the
though-
19th, no matter, yes.
Well, the observed date can be different.
Okay, so it'll be like Christmas Day. Christmas
Right.
Day is Christmas Day.
Right.
And this is how we were trying to figure out what we needed to do.
Right, so this is the scenario we experienced this year, right? The 19th was on
Sunday.
Sunday, but the observed date was the 20th, Monday. And people were complaining about tickets on both days. So if we're gonna be picking one, we need to flip a coin,
I
I
would
guess.
presume too that what we're talking about is because in order for those to be enforced, we have staff on site and so forth. That we're choosing the day that's going to be the holiday where the staff would not be, the parking department would not be working.
Is there I would propose that it be both days. Is there another holiday that also has an observed that we're already doing free parking for?
I mean, Christmas is like this
Right.
it'll be observed on Monday, but it is not a holiday. It's
Right.
Christmas that's the holiday.
Because sometimes you see like the holiday and then you also see observed. So I was wondering if we were already doing that for another one.
What do we do for
No.
President's Day?
It would be when the federal holiday.
It'll always be Monday.
So it'd be that Monday in February.
But that's what we do now.
Yes, that is what we
That's
do.
already on the
We're not, I mean, we're not proposing to change that.
I'm just trying to get consistent.
Right.
Most of our holidays are on the observed date.
Right.
And we'll just have to announce that, make sure it's publicized and,
Well, it's on the meters, like it says New Year's Day.
right,
So New Year's Day, it's always gonna be New Year's Day.
but not some of those other ones, though.
Christmas Day is always Christmas Day, not the day observed. It's always Christmas Day, New Year's Day.
So I'm hearing both things then.
Right.
Harry's saying we would use the observed date because that's the federal holiday, and you're saying we'd use the actual date because that's the holiday.
That's what's on the meters currently.
And we have to be careful deciding to do both because we might be accidentally creating an overtime holiday for our staff.
Right.
So we really have to pick one.
And I presume, I mean, because we've had Veterans Day. Veterans Day, is it always the 11th that we have no parking, or is it when Veterans Day is observed?
Veterans Day is always observed.
Always
on the
November
11th.
11th.
Okay, so it is,
That
that's,
doesn't change.
that does
Always
not change.
November
It's like
Yeah, so it's always Veterans Day.
Okay.
And that would be the same, like if Veterans Day is on a Sunday, that's Veterans Day. Now, we as staff would observe it on Monday.
Well, or Friday it was this year.
Right.
Huh.
This was supposed to be easy.
Right. But I don't think it is. I don't think it is.
So, Mr. Moon, why, so you just said something about we'd have to be careful because of staff overtime.
If we,
Which staff? The parking staff?
any staff,
Uh-huh.
if we're creating a new holiday, we're creating an overtime situation. And so if we're observing the holiday on both days, are we creating 2 days worth of overtime for the entire staff that was not budgeted for?
Well, that would be defined by the contracts, our labor contracts.
I would.
So
I'm
June,
still confused.
for
I was
example,
talking about
Juneteenth was inserted into the new, both labor contracts this round. So from a labor perspective, they're gonna get one holiday. We have another holiday on the books for the non-uniform staff where you have Thanksgiving and the day after Thanksgiving.
And so what day?
So
did we-
that's something, so the day after Thanksgiving, we still enforce, but for staff purposes, it's observed as a holiday.
So what day did we give them in the contract? Is it the 19th or is it the observed federal
Just says
holiday?
Juneteenth. I don't think it specifies observed or the actual date. I'd have to look. If you remember, you had just asked me
I thought it
that.
was the actual date.
I think it's the actual date.
Yeah.
Okay, so, all right, so I'm just saying, we need to avoid what we had this year. People were protesting the tickets they got on Sunday, but they also protested the tickets they got on Monday. One of those in this, revision is going to be correct. We have to pick which one it is.
People are always gonna protest.
Sure.
Getting the ticket.
Sure.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Okay, great. That's super.
So for example, let's stick with Juneteenth. Is Juneteenth usually going to be on a Monday, observed? Or is the
Well,
federal legislation going to be the actual day? Maybe
If-
that's where we just follow whatever the feds are doing.
The feds, living with a federal employee, if the holiday falls on Saturday, it's observed Friday. If it falls on Sunday, it's observed Monday.
So we do that for
And that's
purposes of our labor contracts.
next June 19th is a Monday.
But that's different than enforcing
Makes it easy.
parking regulations.
But for purposes of the ordinance, I guess I need to know whether I need to add that parenthetical after Juneteenth, which would be observed.
Right.
And it sounds like you do.
It does sound that way.
Well, then, we should fix the ordinance to say, read the same way for President's Day and the other ones too. I mean, if we make it observed for all of them, that seems like the easy way out to me unless I'm missing something.
I think that's probably the safest way because Christmas is always observed on Christmas. There's never an alternate date
Right.
on the calendar.
President's Day is always a Monday.
Right.
What about July
Used to
4th?
be Washington's
That would fall in the
birthday.
category of Christmas and New Year's. It's always the
Okay.
date of, it's not an
But
observed
sometimes if
date.
it falls on a weekend, people get that Friday or Monday off, right?
So, that, right, for our labor contracts, that's how it's written, but for enforcement of parking purposes, it's whatever is in the ordinance,
Okay.
which is not necessarily how we observe our labor contracts.
Of course, this year, I mean, because we do want this, I mean, we're moving toward having this advertised so you can have it in effect beginning the 1st of January, I believe. Is New Year's Day?
It's a Sunday.
It's a Sunday. Is it going to, so would that be observed in terms of for no parking or for parking, no payment for parking?
Not yet, because you wouldn't be able to adopt this before January 1st, 2023.
Well,
Or could you?
we have it basically teed up with a.
For December 12th, could we?
Yes, yeah.
Okay,
'Cause
so
it's- I
then,
mean,
so
the-
then,
this
yes.
ordinance has
if-
been authorized.
Absolutely, if it's adopted on the 12th of
Right.
December, then it would be effect for January 1.
Right.
So I know this won't make a difference either, but on Google Calendar, when you look up December 26th this year, it's Christmas Day observed.
Thank you for complicating that.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I
was gonna
just,
say, there's other holidays.
I
that
wanted
have
to make,
observed next to it.
yes, I think because they,
just
that
don't do
Christmas
it.
Day,
Right.
all the federals do observe it on the Monday after if it's on Sunday. So
Right.
there will be observed days. That's why I thought we were making it simple and making it the day
Day
of.
right.
Because
So-
we do have enforcement 7 days a week.
Right,
I
so
think it's easy.
Sunday, it would be a normal enforcement day, except for the fact
That it's a
that it's
holiday.
Christmas Day.
It's Christmas Day.
And New Year's Day, the same thing.
And then, right, so December 26th, I do have part-time staff scheduled. For this current year, I know, like I said, it won't matter, but just to give an example.
So, would everybody support making it the actual day, June 19th, and not the observed date?
If that makes it easier.
Okay. Cool. All right, anything else on that, Becca?
Sorry.
No.
Sorry.
But still get
We've
complaints.
got this teed up, so.
Just-
All right, Mr. Getters,
Thanks for helping.
Mr. Gable and Eastman are gonna talk about the bid tax payment.
Harry, you want to do this, or you want me to do it?
Up to you, Charles. You can defer, or you can talk. Or we can kind of do it jointly.
I'll give the cliff notes, and then maybe Harry can talk about the finer points. So, as you're aware, the Steinware bid assesses a millage rate on all of the properties that pay taxes inside their boundaries. Some of those properties were delinquent, and when that happens, the Tax Claim Bureau goes and finds ways to get them to pay their back taxes. When that happens, those tax revenues are sent to the county, and the county disperses those funds to the taxing authorities. In this case, the county was sending all of the money taxed by Gettysburg Borough and the money additional taxed by the Steinware bid improvement district, And the borough, unbeknownst to the borough, was receiving both payments. That was discovered at some point earlier this year.
I think we started hearing rumblings from the
Right.
bid sometime maybe June,
Right.
maybe late May.
So Harry and Tammy Mordorf, our accountant upstairs, did a deep dive on exactly what was the itemization of what was owed to Gettysburg Borough and what was owed to the Steinware bid. The spreadsheet on the screen here shows you what was remitted in reference to those back payments. And the bottom line here is the borough erroneously received $12,508.88 through the course of several years. Essentially what I'm saying there is that's what the borough really owes back to the Business Improvement District. Now, earlier we mentioned that the Steinware Improvement District was paying for a portion of the loan that the borough took to improve Steinware Avenue. The balance of that loan is $9,706. So if the borough were to forgive the remaining amount owed for that PIB loan, the borough would owe back to the bid $2,802.88. So what we're proposing is forgive the loan, cut them a small check, and everyone is even at that point.
And that small check would be $2,802.96, I guess, for that amount.
I
I
have
propose having that on the
December-
agenda for December,
December.
so that we can get it wrapped up.
Get it all buttoned up by the end of the year.
In this process, the software used by the county did not itemize, as Charles just mentioned. And so everybody was in the dark because software is our friend. And
No, not this case.
we,
Well,
that's
maybe yes, because we got extra money, so.
That's it, but at no time did the borough say, boy, this is a neat arrangement. We didn't know. And, the county didn't even know that it wasn't
Right.
happening in the correct way. So, that was the circumstance, and we're happy that it was discovered and happy that it's resolved in a way that's mutually agreeable.
And you can see from the spreadsheet that Charles put up that, I mean, essentially, we were dealing with 3 late-paying property owners. And what happens is they let it, they don't pay, and then they get right to the point of tax sale, and they pay everything, and that was creating, the allocation, because the collection of the bid money was done, the bid had gone separately to the tax claim to collect their delinquent assessments also. So we wouldn't have had any expectation from the borough's perspective when we received that payment that we were also receiving the bid, we're receiving the bid assessment.
Okay.
Do it.
Good, all right. Thank
I
you.
think there'll be I've asked Attorney King, Todd King is the solicitor for the bid, and I asked him to prepare a simple, straightforward settlement agreement, but so we can kind of track this and be able to. And I guess the long and the short of it is that we're all very now aware of it, but I don't think the county's changing its software, so we need to be mindful of it. And we just bored Jim Hale, so.
No, not just, a long time.
But who's counting?
All right, thank you, gentlemen. Mr. Gable, the Adams County Conservation District MOU.
Yeah, the Conservation District sent the borough a letter some time ago essentially saying that this is their 75th year in existence, the Adams County Conservation District. Municipalities throughout Adams County have an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, to essentially promote the voluntary conservation and good stewardship of the natural resources within the municipalities in Adams County. I believe the last time this was passed was about 10 years ago. So it seems like these happen in 10-year cycles. With it being expired, they are asking that the council renew their MOU with the Conservation District. And if that's your wish, this draft memorandum of understanding in your packet would appear on your December 12th meeting.
Did everybody have a chance to review that?
And essentially, the memorandum of understanding just places, or it doesn't change anything. It basically just sets forth what the various duties are actually under the law of the Conservation District and of the municipality. So,
Okay. Is everybody comfortable with moving forward on that? Status quo? All right. Thank you. And then Mr. Gable is going to talk to us about the FLAP reimbursement MOU, Federal Lands Access Program.
Yes. So as you are aware, the borough is the recipient of an $800,000 Federal Lands Access Program FLAP grant. And we are using those funds to design the Gettysburg Gateway Connectivity Project, otherwise known as the Baltimore Street Revitalization Project. We do have the reimbursement agreement from PennDOT through the feds, and but before money can really begin to change hands, we need council to authorize that reimbursement program. And so with your wishes, this will appear on the December 12th meeting for approval.
Everybody good with that? Okay, please proceed. And that brings us to, well, Mr. Claybaugh already discussed the inner loop funding strategy. So that brings us to Mr. Gable to discuss the Pennsylvania Local Government Investment Trust.
So, some time ago, the council passed a fund balance policy. And as you recall, part of that policy is essentially setting a threshold from which each of the borough's funds should not fall below a reserve amount. So for example, the general fund should have, according to your policy, between 18 and 25% of a year's revenue or of a year's expenditures in reserve. The borough has that, and we have, over the last 12 months, been putting all of that reserve money into month CDs at AC&B Bank. The investment and debt policy is the corollary to the fund balance policy, and we just never really got to really discuss it for various reasons. And of course, we know what happened in 2020, which put everything on hold essentially. But now that we have these funds in reserve, what's the best way to maximize that return on investment, if you will? And while we don't have a full proposed investment and debt policy, there's things council can do while we formally discuss a policy in the next several months. There is an organization called the Pennsylvania Local Government Investment Trust, PLGIT, where kind of like our healthcare program, it's a bunch of municipalities pool resources. This is not exactly the same thing, but it's similar concept. The return on investment with PLGIT is significantly higher than, I'm trying to find it real quick. Than our current CDs with AC&B Bank. And
What did you say we're currently getting for the current?
0.05% is our current, here we go, is our current rate of return on,
so basically nothing.
No.
It's
where our current yields for Pliget, for example, as of last week, were in the ballpark of 3.5%. So if council wishes to invest your reserve funds for the municipality in a greater return, Pliget is an avenue to do that. Now, just so everyone knows, there are legal limits to how you can invest public funds. This is one of those allowable uses or investment opportunities, if you will. So I'm just putting it out there. If council is interested in this, we could put this on the agenda, get it approved, and we can begin the transfer as the CDs come mature at ACME Bank. We can move the money into the Pliget program and start receiving higher rates of return.
How long would the terms of the investments be?
That's up to us as a municipality. There's different types of classes of funding here. You can see they have what's called a Pliget class, reserve class, and prime. I'm not quite sure of the nuances of those three, but we can certainly investigate those before we make the transfers.
So we would be able to access funds as needed if the terms had matured?
Yeah, some of these are more liquid than others, yeah.
That one looks like it's 3.9.
Yeah, 3.97.
Okay.
Would it be smart to wait for these CDs to expire, or would we just, if we take them out, I mean, what's the penalty? They're only paying 0.25%. I mean, next thing, we're gonna be paying them to hold our money.
So we do have them, all these CDs are short-term, so every month one comes due, because we've been doing this for the last 12 months, opening a new CD of $79,000.
Well, my point is, if one of them's gonna be 12 months from now till it rolls over, is it worth keeping it in at 0.25%? Or, you know, maybe anything that's 4 months or later, we just pull out now and.
It's 0.05.
They're all 3 months.
Yeah, 0.0.
Even less.
Excuse me.
Even less.
Excuse me, yes.
They're all 3 months.
They're actually all
Sarah
now all
said.
3-month CDs, but yes. I mean, we could do that math and figure that out.
Right, right.
Yeah, I mean, off the top of my head, that seems like a better way to go, because
Put all $948,000,
whatever,
yeah, $948,000 in at once.
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, you know, we'd be drawing at least 3% as opposed to 0.025.
Right.
Yeah, so we could afford to take a little bit of a hit there and still come out ahead.
We'd make 30 some odd $1,000 in the first year, so that seems like a pretty sensible thing to do. Anybody opposed to this?
I'm for it. Are there other municipalities that are our size that you know of that are using Pliget already?
Actually smaller. When I was manager in Brookville, we used Pliget aggressively, and their budget's half ours.
And what, just off the top of your head, or does anybody know, what is or will they not let us get to the point of the max that we can legally get by investing public funds?
I'm not following your question.
So a minute ago you said there are some limits to investments of public funds.
Oh, yeah, Bell, California is a perfect example of that.
So
That's what you're not allowed to
Pliget
do.
will
Look that one up.
make
That's
sure
a good
that
story.
we don't do that.
Yeah.
Or
No, you're only allowed to put public funds into secure,
Gotcha. Okay.
insured investments, yes.
I think he was saying that the limit is the uses it can be applied to, not the amount
Not the
you can
amount.
invest.
Right.
Thank you for that clarification.
Right. Okay. I think everybody's cool with that.
Yep.
All right, thank you. Any other discussion on that? Any other discussion on any of our old or new business tonight? Anybody wanted to revisit? All right, that brings us to our second public comment. This one is not restricted to items on the agenda, but again, please speak at the podium and limit yourself to 5 minutes. Anybody? Okay. Seeing none, we are adjourned.